Minister in the Office of the Attorney General.
Mr. President, thank you for recognizing me in this debate. Mr. President, I apologize in advance for having to rise to share licks on little children. But I must do what I have to do, Mr. President. The Honorable Senator tried his very best, Mr. President, but his contribution was as empty as his pockets. So there's very little, Mr. President, that I will have to address in my contribution. Mr. President, as I begin immediately, and I hardly ever do it, but I want to use some of the words of the Honorable Senator Anil Roberts in his contribution. I want to use his words, but to my benefit, Mr. President, he is correct about something. Perfect practice makes perfect, but perfect practice makes the perfect practice make perfect the PNM Minister of Finance. And I want to join with my colleagues and recognize the Minister of Finance for what he has done in this appropriation bill. I also want, and I hardly ever do it, I want to use the words of Senator Roberts again when he spoke about poof. Well, Mr. President, I want to remind the UNC, the members of the opposition, in 2025, poof, my friend on the right here will be taking Shogunas East. Just like that, Mr. President, I want to remind my friends in the opposition in 2025, my good friend, senatorial colleague, poof, will be taking Barataria San Juan. And of course, Mr. President, I want to remind my colleagues on the other side, in 2025, just like that, poof, I will be taking St. Augustine as the next member of Parliament for St. Augustine. Mr. President, the Honorable Senator, Senator Smith, he compared Trinidad and Tobago with Dubai, Mr. President. Let us, and I'm speaking now to the citizens, the sober, prudent, thinking citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I have been fortunate to visit Dubai several times. And not on government spending, by the way. And what I want to say, Mr. President, is what we are failing to realize, or what the senator forgot to mention, is that the systems of government that exist in nations such as Dubai is very, very different from the systems of government that exist in our nation. Systems like, well, first to begin with, I agree with my colleague, the first thing Dubai don't have is the UNC. So that is probably half of their problems or 3/4 of their problems solved. And apart from that, Mr. President, you're looking at autocratic systems of government where leaders could put into place whatever they want to do, not having accountability for populations. And you want to make that comparison, Mr. President. That is why, unfortunately, I said I had to rise to share little licks on Tehran, and I made mention that the presentation was as empty as the Honorable Senator's pockets, Mr. President. Mr. President, just a few hours ago, my goodly colleague here showed me an article in the Express 2 hours ago by the Express Travel Global Authority, which identified, Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago in the top 10 places, must-visit places in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President, in the world, and that was posted 2 hours ago. Trinidad and Tobago identified in the top 10 best places to visit in Trinidad and Tobago. So when we go on and on about the lack of foreign direct investment and we produce a sense as if there is doom and gloom.
Standing order 45-1.
Yes. Again, the crosstalk is getting to a level which is making the minister have to raise her voice in order for it to carry. So just try and temper the crosstalk so that it does not rise above the level of the contributor. Continue, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, I just want to remind the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, let us not get caught up with all the politicking that took place today and over the past couple of weeks when this bill was debated. Let us remember and let us still continue to have faith in our country and in the direction in which our country is going, Mr. President. Mr. President, now on some serious matters, again, as I continue my contribution, I want to go back to yesterday, Mr. President, the debate that I would have paid attention to on a contribution made by Senator Jolene John. And in the senator's contribution, Mr. President, the senator focused significantly on the crime situation that exists in Trinidad and Tobago. Senator Smith also spoke about crime, and yes, crime has taken up a significant part of the conversation in this budget debate, both in the other place and in this House. But Mr. President, I went back, the Hansard was not available, so I looked at the video recording. And I want to read into the record the exact words placed onto the record by Senator Jolene John. And then I will get into the danger, Mr. President, and explain why crime and criminality continues to be a problem in this country. Senator Jolene John, just like her members, are positioning themselves to be the next government of Trinidad and Tobago. They call themselves the government in waiting. And these are the types of statements, Mr. President, that persons who are positioning themselves for leadership will make to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I read, Mr. President, this is my verbatim notes from that recording, Mr. President. The senator said, Mr. President, in making reference to the death of businessman Sachel Kunjabihari, who was from Kunupia. The senator went on to say in her speech, Mr. President, businessman Sachel Kunjabihari was from Kunupia. That is probably the reason he hasn't been mentioned. Perhaps his flight does not matter to the government. His flight doesn't matter because he's from Kunupia. He probably was not highfalutin enough, not elite enough, because during the budget debate in the other place, all this happened. They asked for 500,000 ransom, and after it was paid, they killed him. But this is what I want to go on to read too. The senator said, his mother in her pain said that I wish the commissioner of police could feel her pain. And she went on to say, I wish the whole of the PNM could feel her pain. And this is a senator, Mr. President, who has gone on the record to wish pain and suffering to the members of this entire bench. So she's hoping that we experience the pain of loss that this family would have suffered. You know why I read this into the record, Mr. President?
Right. Senator Leida, you had your chance to speak. Continue, Minister.
Why I raise this? So you have a minister, a member of a Senate, who's positioning herself to be a leader in this country. And you could stand before this country and wish pain on another side. Yes, we understand we are from different political backgrounds. We have different opinions. Yes, we're in the political hustings, Mr. President. But no responsible person positioning themselves to lead a government or lead a country will wish any kind of pain on any citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President. Mr. President, and that's why I raise this issue is because that is the division and the hate and the anger that the UNC continues to spew. And we ask the question why there is violence in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President. We ask ourselves why there is hurt and why there is suffering and why crime has spiraled. Because when leaders could stand and wish bad upon other people, people are supposed to be responsible, Mr. President, could stand and make those kinds of statements. It tells you about the leadership that the other side is offering, Mr. President. Mr. President, the senator also, in her statement, Mr. President, but what I can say though, and I'm sure I could speak on behalf of my ministerial colleagues and decide when I say, you see the PNM, we have taken an oath to serve all manner of people in this country. And we will never wish that pain and suffering, not even on our enemies, much less colleagues in this Senate, because we understand what responsible government is all about, Mr. President. The issue of crime, it is a serious issue, Mr. President. As the senator also made the point of this government not understanding what it is to lose persons and making it appear to the citizenry that we run past in our blue lights and we are out of touch. Mr. President, I have no fear to read into the record. Because contrary to what the other side believes, and contrary to what they sell the people, the citizens of this country, we on this side, we continue through this appropriation bill, Mr. President, to ensure that the police and ensure that our protective services, as best as we can do, are given the necessary funding in order to ensure that we protect our citizens. Yes, we are not where we want to be, Mr. President, but because we understand the pain and the suffering of our citizens, Mr. President, because it has also hit home for some of us, Mr. President, we will continue to fight that fight. Mr. President, Ms. Jolene John, Senator Jolene John, in her presentation, she spoke a lot and identified by names persons who would have died. And I send my deepest condolences to all those family members. But I will say this, Mr. President, Police Constable Vijay Harinarayan, who was shot down, I could say to Trinidad and Tobago, that was my cousin, my first cousin, Mr. President. I attended his funeral. He was outside, shot down and killed. Alan Babwa, who a home invasion, not too long ago, killed a client of mine for 10 years, Mr. President. Samantha Isaac, we have heard in this Senate, the Tot Lampkin case, a domestic violence landmark case, Mr. President. Samantha Isaac, I taught her for 5 years at St. Francois Girls College. She was one of my best history students. And if you see the pictures of that child in the papers, they don't do her justice. Pretty little girl. So when they come here and they make it seem as if this government, we don't understand what the man on the ground going through, I can say to the members and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, why I will continue to do my little part, why every single member of this government will continue to do their part, is because we do understand what the citizens of this country are going through. But what we will not do is give up, Mr. President. What we will not do is wish death upon even the opposition. What we will do is continue to bring legislation, as the Attorney General has done. What we will continue to do is to fight corruption. You know, Senator Jolene John spoke about there was no crime or limited crime during the UNC's time. I will tell you why, because the crime was in the cabinet. And I will make reference now to my leader in the ministry in which I serve, the Attorney General. Sir, I want to congratulate you on that landmark decision yesterday that we received from the Privy Council. They say, suddenly I hear a man on the other side, he backtracking from the decisions of the Privy Council. Same honorable member who didn't want to support the CCJ. They don't want to hear nothing about the CCJ. But I understand the story about the Privy Council changed now because the decision didn't go into their favor. And for the members of the public who may have missed it, you see, I also have a responsibility, Mr. President, to report on the Office of the Attorney General, which I have the benefit and the blessing to serve alongside this distinguished senior counsel who don't have a criminal record to his name, who have never been to the court to answer to any criminal offense other than to represent criminals and represent people. And I want to make reference to that landmark decision, Mr. President. Of course, the Minister of Finance and let me congratulate, of course, the brilliant Minister of Finance as well in this decision. Not no bush lawyer he is. The Minister of Finance on their win. And of course, that is TN Ramnath and Company Limited, Taradat Ramnath, Calco Limited, Motilal Ramhit and Sons Contracting Limited, Fives Limited versus the Estate Management Business Development Company, Mr. President. That matter yesterday, Mr. President, and the Office of the Attorney General would have issued the release which spoke about the court. It was an application that was made, and I'll get to some of the nitty-gritty of that matter just now, because I'm reporting on the Office of the AG, and we do law. We represent the state, so I can't talk about this case. as I report to the people of Trinidad and Tobago where your money is spent in the Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of Legal Affairs. In this particular matter, Mr. President, it is no secret to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that a member of Parliament who currently sits in the other side is party to this matter, Mr. President. In this particular matter, an application was made to the Privy Council to strike out the case that was brought against them. And the Privy Council said, no, we are not striking it out in very layman terms because I want the people on the street to understand. Go to court, file your defense, and defend your matter in court. Mr. President, but here's what is critical for the people of this country to understand. Mr. President, these men and women who are putting forward themselves, again, apart from wishing everybody dead, and who are putting themselves forward again as the alternative government of Trinidad and Tobago, and one is the lead spokesperson in the other place, Mr. President. This is a matter, and for the benefit of my honorable senators here, and for the benefit of the listening public, this is a matter, you know what this matter involves? Let me tell you the kind of charges, kind of issues that are raised in this matter, Mr. President. Unlawful means conspiracy. Mr. President, bribery. Mr. Vice President, receiving and knowing receipt, Mr. President. Dishonest assistance, Mr. President. Breach of fiduciary duty, Mr. President. That is the kind of matter, that is the matter that is coming up before the court, Mr. President. That the chief spokesperson in the other place, that many of this on this side lag, because show me your leader. Anyway, Mr. President, that is the nature of this matter that now is before the court, that the Privy Council said they tried to, the defense tried to show that they didn't have a matter, the state didn't have a matter. And the Privy Council said, no, your application is dismissed. Go back home, I think it's on the 4th of September, sometime in November, 4th of November. They have to put in their defense before Justice C. Prasad. And I will say nothing more about that matter, Mr. President. But just to reiterate the point to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that is why crime was low during the UNC time, because it was in the cabinet at Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. President, and to go back to the point when I made, the points that I made when I made mention to these young people, these persons who, it hit home for me, Mr. President. It was to make the point that, and for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand that every member that sits on this bench, Mr. President, contrary, and I know, and I have to belabor the point, contrary to what the UNC will come and try to fill your head with, understand that on this side you have members who have taken an oath to every single citizen of this country. And I end there because, not my contribution, I end there making an oath for every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago because, yeah, this is we're in the season of politics. And Senator John, together with some of the other side, members of the other side, throughout the length, even though it was irrelevant in their contribution, suggested to this nation, they spoke about Bacchanal in the PNM. They suggested that they were runners for the leadership of the PNM. And underlying that conversation, Mr. President, was a suggestion that it seems as if you belong to another race that is not the base of the PNM, that you don't have a chance to lead this party. Mr. President, I know back and let me tell you why I'm raising that issue. Senator Lashmi Diala, I wish she was here. She spoke about members of the PNM, pusur to the media. Pusur about issues that took place at a meeting that the PNM recently had. Well, I'm not going to pusur, I'm going to say it here. What I'm going to say, Mr. President, and I'm sure, and I'm willing to break confidence of that meeting to say one thing. What whoever the informer should have pusur and tell them was that at that said meeting, our political leader reminded us that the People's National Movement is a movement of all people for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And he reminded, so he doesn't just do that on our political leader, don't just mount a political platform and speak about unity, Mr. President. Our political leader, even behind closed doors in the confidence of his own home, which is in Balize House, yes, he will speak to us, Mr. President, about the PNM having a place for every single citizen. And I raise that point to speak to the young people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I say to you, I am a representative that there is a place for East Indian Hindu young women in the PNM. Senator Richie Sukai is an indicator that it is a place for bright young Hindu Indian men in the PNM. Avinash said, don't talk about the bright boy Vyash Nanlal, Senator Nanlal. The UNC, Mr. President, with all due respect, they push themselves as the premier East Indian party of Trinidad and Tobago because that is where their base is. Mr. President, show me one bright young person. They were able, every time there's an independence, there's an absence of a senator, poor Uncle Tim. They had to call him back. They had to call him back to come and represent from retirement. They had to call him back from retirement. Mr. President, if today or tomorrow I am to leave this office for whatever the reason, trust me when I say it, have 100 young, bright Indian people line up, waiting to come and defend the PNM. Senator Smith, a glad boy. I'm glad that you're here. They give you a little blight. Senator Rambajan, I was actually very impressed with her. But you see, people has come to pusur to we too about what happens in the UNC. And I heard the poor senator couldn't last on because she was brighter than 3/4 of all of them on the bench. So that is why they sacked she one time. I don't know. That's the pusur I get in my ears. So, Mr. President, and that is to remind you, because as I said, we're in the political season. And I want the young people of Trinidad and Tobago, I want you to know that the PNM is a place and a space that every single one of us, once you have talent and a true dedication to serve this country, to Trinidad and Tobago, you have a place. And as we talk about Tobago, Mr. President, the other side try, they can't step in the shoes or the shadow of the Honorable Senator Dennis. You understand? And in this parliament, in the People's National Movement, there is also a place and a space for them bright boys, good-looking boys, them from Tobago, Senator Hislop as well. That is equality. I sat here for the last 3 days and I felt so proud, prouder than ever to be a member of the People's National Movement. When I look down this row and I see the kind and quality of gentlemen that I could feel safe, I could feel respected, I know they're not going to cross no line. That is the kind of government I want to associate myself with. And it begs the question, Mr. President, that is why I can't see no good, decent family on the other side wanting their children to link up on that side. Because you would know what you're exposing your children to. Anyway, but I will leave that point. I would leave that point there, Mr. President. Mr. President, and mind you, as I still deal with the case, that case that I would have mentioned, this is a case where the claim, Mr. President, is for $275 million that the...
Wow.
46. This matter is before the courts, the sub judice.
Senator Sagramsingh? Senator Sagramsingh, please continue.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Mr. Vice. And I am not I am a lawyer, not a bush lawyer. So I know very well, Mr. President, what the sub judice rule applies to. And what I'm responding to, Mr. President, is the decision of the Privy Council, hot off the press, in Trinidad and Tobago that was before this country yesterday. And in that same matter, Mr. President, that is not sub judice. Mention was made about the claim for the $275 million which the state is pursuing. And I would leave that right there, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I continue, so those were just some of the things that I wanted to remind the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago, contrary to what the other side says. Crime has struck home for many of us. We understand what you are going through, but what we will never do is give up, Mr. President. We will make Tobago safe through our senators and our minority leaders, and pretty soon we will take back the assembly too. So we will make Tobago safe. Mr. President, in this country, there's no geographical discrimination, as the UNC likes to put it off. Want to feed Indian people that they're being neglected by the PNM government. I stand against that, Mr. President, because I want to believe that I want to believe, and I believe from the depths of my being that the PNM is being led by a political leader, Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley. And for those who are asking who our leader is, Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley, who will ensure that every citizen in this country, Mr. President, is taken care of. Mr. President, as I jump into, of course, there's a responsibility, the Honorable Attorney, and you know, to that end, I want to sincerely thank my Attorney General. It has been an absolute pleasure, Mr. President, to work alongside a man of more than 40 years' experience. Mr. President, as I try to briefly talk about the ministry, the Attorney General in his presentation would have spoken about his legislative agenda. Mr. President, I want to add and join with the Attorney General as he thanked the members of the Agla family. I want to thank, Mr. President, our Acting Permanent Secretary, Indira Chedi Rampal. For the first time, the ministry is privileged to have a lawyer who sits in the seat as the Acting Attorney General, and I believe that is a benefit to the ministry, the Office of the Attorney General, to have an attorney at law as the PS who understands what the dynamics of the legal practice entails. So I need to thank our PS, our deputy PSs, Ms. Lewis, our Chair Augustine, and all of the Agla family, because the AG is correct. We are indeed a family at the Office of the Attorney General, and no family is perfect, Mr. Vice President. We recognize that, but we continue in the Office of the AG to bring the pieces together, Mr. President. To that end, Mr. President, I know Mr. Timal, and I'm glad Senator Timal is here. We report to the office of, as I report briefly on some of the other areas of the Office of the Attorney General, I know Senator Timal spoke at length about the family and the importance of the family. And there's one department, Mr. President, at the Office of the Attorney General that I want to make mention to, and that's the Vacation and After School Coordination Center, Mr. President. And it's led by the coordinator, Ms. Rauti Maraj. And why I'm making mention, Mr. President, it's actually in the public service, believe it or not. I've mentioned that before. It's a daycare and after-school service that we offer. I am a mother. During my years of practice, I was a relatively young mother with young children, and I know what it is when you are a professional person and you need that care for your children. I want to recognize that is where, to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, that is where your monies are being spent to maintain this after-school program, to ensure that our public servants are equally given a place and a sense of comfort that their children are being taken care of. Because, Senator Timal, we too recognize the importance of the family. I want to briefly, as I start to wrap up, Mr. President, I want to speak, of course, of the Public Defender's Department. And I will tell you particularly why I want to mention the Public Defender's Department. Throughout the length and breadth of this budget debate, and even in other debates, we always speak about the backlog that exists in our criminal justice system. I must say the Public Defender's Department is one of the greatest spends, I believe, that our ministry or expenditure paid a good investment for our ministry. And I will tell you why, because it helps the overall landscape of the criminal justice system. I want to recognize Senior Counsel Haseen Sheikh. Mr. President, as I briefly report to Trinidad and Tobago, 462 matters have been completed by virtue of the Public Defender's Department. And what is unique about the Public Defender's Department, Mr. Vice President, is a staff of 30 lawyers, and they utilize arbitration measures, for want of a better word, plea mitigation. So it's not that these 462 matters are litigated, Mr. President. They revert to issues of plea mitigation, plea bargaining legislation, where they work with the prosecution in the interest, of course, course, Mr. President, on the mandate of the Attorney General, and of course in an effort to save taxpayers money in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President, there's a sense of it, the encouragement of plea bargaining and the utilization of that legislation, Mr. President, because we recognize that the Office of the AG, you cannot simply trial matters out of a system. There are other means of resolving, and I must say hats off, of course, to the Public Defender's Department, Mr. President, and believe it or not, just to remind the public, do you know what the cost to maintain one prisoner, Mr. Vice President? It's almost $25,000, Mr. President, a month to one prisoner on remand. That is the approximate cost. And if you multiply that $25,000 a month by 12, you're looking at $300,000 in a year. And if you multiply that $300,000 by 15 years, let's say 15 is the maximum amount of time that a man stays in remand, you're looking at about $4,500,000 approximately to maintain one prisoner on remand. And why I make mention of that is because because the public defenders are doing their part and trying to get these matters to conclusion, we are moving people even out of the remand system. And what does that do? That frees up money, Mr. Vice President, money that could have been spent, that was previously spent in the prison, that could be spent on young people to ensure that they don't reach to the prison. So, Mr. President, as I wrap up and give my other members of this bench opportunity to, of course, jump in, this too, Mr. President, is indeed may very well be my last budget presentation, but only in this house, Mr. President, because soon I will be packing my Jaji bundle and heading over to the other place and joining my ministerial and government colleagues, Mr. President, yourself too, as you bring home Barataria Sanwan in the other place. As I conclude, I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for the opportunity afforded to the young people in this party. And just look at us, Mr. President, on the backbenchers, a strong backbench. I want to thank him for giving us an opportunity because he recognizes that we are the future of the People's National Movement. And Mr. President, with those few words, I thank you for the opportunity.